I think everyone's walking around with a little pep in their step and a little happy today. I've seen many Chiefs shirts and ties, so pretty exciting time. We will start with a point of personal privilege from Senator Argerbright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Never a doubt last night, was there? Never a doubt. Boy, it's a privilege today to have some people in our committee that I'd like to introduce. Can you hear me okay? USD 252 Southern Line County Honor Flight, Superintendent Mulig, Mrs. McGuire, one of the teacher coordinators, Mrs. Garrett, one of the teacher coordinators at Hartford, Mrs. McGuire's at Olpe. Would the Olpe students stand up? And would the Hartford students stand up? You have two high schools represented here. I want to just give a snapshot because I have some other things to say at the chamber. Okay, so I don't want to try to be too repetitive here. This program has supported 13 flights. Students are paired with veterans. Sometimes they know them, sometimes they don't. And sometimes the student paired with grandpa is maybe the biggest challenge, as odd as that sounds. But sometimes they don't even know who these veterans are, and the relationships that they create are absolutely incredible and life-lasting. I'll talk about that more at the chamber, but these kids help fundraise. Those teachers and Superintendent Mulig do a lot of it, but they do help, and it's a 12-month program. And what I really want to say to all of you, from a curriculum standpoint, this is this is the best civic engagement program I've ever been a part of. It truly engages the kids. The highlights are the juniors and seniors, but those teachers at all levels get the kids engaged from K to 12, whether it's writing congratulations and thank you notes to veterans, to listening to the older kids present to the younger kids. Truly just an awesome program. I just want to say thank you to all of you. Welcome. And this is just one example of the great work in public schools that's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that. And can we get the superintendent, and did I hear we have an instructor and superintendent? We could not, please, thank you for all that you do in this. It sounds like an amazing program, and appreciate all of your hard work. Okay, do we have any bill introductions? I do have one. It is RS 0501, and this is the tax credit for low-income students, making some adjustments to that program. Are there any objections to introducing that bill? Seeing none, it is introduced. A few housekeeping before we get to our presenter today. I just want to remind the committee that we do have a hearing on SB 75 tomorrow. We have had hundreds of testimony submitted for that, so please make sure you're here on time. We will give as much time as we can to conferees, but just know that this will be a busy. We will start and maximize our time tomorrow to get to the floor at 2:30. Also, reminder that Wednesday is the Teacher of the Year presentation. We will be meeting jointly with the House Education Committee at our normal time, but in the old Supreme Court room, so please make that adjustment. And then Thursday, while we're doing our schedule, we will have our Board of Regents nominee, Kathy Wolf-Moore, will be here for the hearing. Please make sure you look over that packet and bring it with you on Thursday. Okay, any questions? Seeing none, I am excited to have with us today Dr. Cynthia Lane, who is spearheading the effort on the Blueprint for Literacy. And I know we've heard a lot about that, but just want to make sure that we know the status of where that is and more about that program. So welcome, Dr. Lane.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's great to be here with this committee. And as I look around the room, I look forward to hearing your feedback and frankly helping us to make this as strong as possible so that every child in Kansas learns to read. So, Madam Chair, my plan today was to talk a little bit about the problem we're trying to resolve, the literacy crisis, talk specifically about what's required in Senate Bill 438, that established the blueprint, review our progress, and gain any insight if that sounds amenable to what you're expecting.
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get this up and running. I have just a few slides for you, but as we're getting that in place, at your place, you received a testimony from me. You also received early in January the plan to establish the Centers of Reading, and January 15th you received the progress report. All of those are in this packet that was at your place. I thought might be helpful as we move forward on our discussion today. So let me just get right into it, and please, I don't mind if the chair doesn't mind questions as we're going through it, however you'd like to do that. But for me, I think about the most important thing to keep in mind about where we are and trying to ensure that all Kansas children learn to read is that success to address that challenge is going to take absolutely every one of us working together, committed to finding a way to overcome this really difficult challenge. And I also just want to say, secondly, that this is going to take some time. This is not one of these we can solve it quickly kinds of dilemmas. And you all know that because literacy has been one of your priorities for a long time. So I wish there was a switch we could flip like we did to close that door. But you all know from your background and experience that it's going to take a lot more. I also want to invite you to be thinking about this conversation today, not only from a legislator perspective, a policymaker perspective, but frankly from a family perspective, a neighbor's perspective, an educator's perspective, because I would imagine every one of you here today can put a face to the data that says someone that you know and love, or maybe even someone you see when you look in the mirror, experienced what it's like to struggle to learn to read. Because unlike what some think, learning to read does not come natural. It's a process for us that requires a lot of work within our brains, and all of our brains function differently. And we can all learn to read, but many of us need a different path. So let's talk a little bit about the problem that we face. Reading is a skill that impacts everything in life. It's the skill that is required when you're in school and bleeds over into all other content area. The data tells us that there's about 85% of literacy involved in an adult's economic activity. And in school, 85% of our curriculum requires literacy skills in order to understand that curriculum. It's a prerequisite for most adult employment. And recently, the Barbara Bush Foundation did a study that talked about the impact on our national economy for adults who don't read well. And I was really taken back that we have 130 million U.S. citizens ages 16 to 72 who read below the 6th grade level. 130 million of adults. Now, we often have this conversation wanting to talk about our kids, but this is not just a problem for our children. It is a problem we all face. And that translates into $2.2 trillion in economic development lost because of an individual's difficulty with reading. And if we bring that closer to home, the impact in Kansas is also significant, estimating about $19.3 billion in lost economic growth due to the fact that we have many, many adults who struggle to read. So we know it's an imperative, and I see you already looking at some of the data, and you're familiar with the data, but I want to just kind of set the stage. In Kansas, you all have done an amazing job bringing high-skilled jobs into our state. In fact, by the year 2030, it's anticipated that 54,000 new jobs will be coming to Kansas that are high-skilled technical jobs. Yet at the same time that we have these wonderful opportunities, a third of our children struggling to read well, reading in what we call below basic on the state assessment. So in your packet, you have this map that we've been working on to demonstrate that this is not an urban problem, it's not a rural problem, it's not a public school problem, it's not a private school problem, it's a problem everywhere in our state. And frankly, it is not a problem just for Kansas. Kansas is doing as well, if not better, than most of the states in the Midwest region. But I know we're not satisfied that we have 30% of our children not reading well. Now, some would say they don't read. That's not accurate. They just don't read well enough to handle grade level content. So we know that about 40% of our children nationally learn to read easily. And another 30 to 40% learn to read, but it requires significant effort. And then there's about 20 to 30% nationally of our children that learning to read may be the most difficult thing they ever do in their lives. And if you know an adult who struggled to learn to read, that challenge never leaves us. So yeah, we're not alone in the challenge. It's significant. So how did we get here? You're educators, many of you in the room, and you know, we went through 30-plus years of the reading wars where educators were told this is the right methodology, that's the right methodology. And what the science is now clear on is that we need to be using what's called structured literacy, which is an explicit and direct approach to teaching all the elements of literacy. That was designed originally for children with dyslexia, but the research is now showing that that structured literacy approach is what we all need. And then now we have a gap because many educators like myself and others who finished their degree a long time ago, we weren't trained in structured literacy. We were trained in a whole variety of methodologies. And so we now have an opportunity to take on what is the largest workforce development initiative in our state's history to ensure that we're equipping our educators with the skills they need to deliver high-quality structured literacy in every classroom across the state. So the blueprint came about with that in mind, saying higher ed's responsibility is workforce development. And the Board of Regents about 3 years ago asked our deans of education what we could do to be more supportive, watching all the efforts of our State Board of Education to try to provide training for educators. And so the board has made it a #1 priority to help with the literacy needs, the literacy training to ensure that our teachers have the skills they need to move forward. And so Senate Bill 438, the Blueprint for Literacy, was established to focus on post-secondary education, higher ed mostly, in partnership with the State Board and KSDE. But it really focuses on what higher ed needs to be doing. So you all appropriated $10 million to establish the blueprint, and it was signed into law in April of last year, and you appropriated that to the Board of Regents to implement this initiative. And part of that is striving to ensure that the Board of Regents and the universities are fully engaged, and really importantly, that we have a coherent strategy with the State Board of Education and KSDE to bring all of our leverage and resources forward to help solve this problem. So let's dig in a little bit to what we're trying to do. I like to think a simple way of looking at this, the blueprint, working in partnership with you all and the State Board, we're trying to equip our teachers so every child can read. You see from the documents, there's a lot of pieces and parts involved in this, but the issue is, how do we get our teachers the tools that they need? Some have those tools, but not all, and ensure that every child learns to read. We're to create a sustainable system for educators that produces results around 2 goals. The first goal is that by the year 2030, 100% of our elementary educator workforce will achieve a credential in structured literacy. Now, I use the word workforce deliberately because we're talking about classroom teachers, and we're talking about paraprofessionals, and we're talking about building leaders, and it's everyone involved in the instruction. So working in partnership with KSD and the initiatives they have, the blueprint is charged to achieve a goal of 100% of our educators achieving a credential. The law says micro-credential, credential, or other training that shows that they have the skills that they need. In your packet, I know you can't see this form on the slide, but in your packet of information, there is a chart that's called micro-credential needs, and so you can see who's currently in training, who needs training, and what is our gap. So I'll answer questions about that if you have them. Second goal, most important goal, is by 2033, 90% of our 3rd through 8th graders will be reading on the Kansas assessment at level 2 or higher, and that 50% of those students will achieve a level 3 and 4. So a short way to think about that, the goal for this blueprint, the goal in working in partnership with you and the state board and educators and parents and advocates is that we achieve in Kansas a 90% reading goal. That 90% of our children learn to read well and can handle grade level content. Right now, we have about 32% of our children reading below that. So this requires, between today and 2033, that we increase by 3% annually the performance of moving children from level 1 to level 2 to get to that goal. So we're highly focused on putting strategies together that focus on that. And this slide just simply shows you those benchmarks, where we are today and where we must get by collaborating with each other. So let's dig specifically into what's required in the blueprint besides those goals. I would have you think about the Blueprint for Literacy as a collection of practical steps that higher ed is to take in partnership with the state board to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. And it is made up of several things, which include establishing the advisory committee. I'm very grateful that Chair Erickson serves on that committee. Establishing that advisory committee whose job is to monitor and to recommend and to achieve those goals. The second part was hire a director to help with the implementation. Next step was to make sure that the science of reading and specifically structured literacy is the approach that's being taught in higher education, educator preparation programs. And at the same time, recommend to the state board that they take the same stance. And I'm pleased to report that they have done so. The next piece of the blueprint was to redesign curriculum in the higher ed space for our undergraduates in particular, and to ensure that our curriculum is reviewed annually and that it is in alignment with structured literacy. The fourth big area of courses that are designed for in-service educators that help them achieve that credential in structured literacy. Courses that the tuition is at low or no cost to that educator, and that they can be awarded graduate credit. So I'm pleased to report to you today that that course will be ready to be piloted in March this spring, and then all 7 public universities will be using that Foundations in Science course. And we are excited to know that the independent colleges also want to be part of that. So developing a course for our in-service educators, and also developing courses for our undergraduate educators that were not only about the theory, but focused on the application. And so those courses had to be in place by August 2024, 1 month after the blueprint went into law. And so I'm pleased to report to you today that those courses are in place. So the individuals in our undergraduate programs across our public universities all now have 2 courses in the science of reading. There are other courses as well, but 2 courses that are specific to application. And we can talk more about that if you're interested. And then the big approach that the committee has spent a lot of time on is the Centers of Excellence in Reading, and I'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward. So those are the requirements, and many of them, I didn't mention joint collaboration with the state board and accountability, but these are the big ideas that are in the law. So if you would like to join me now actually looking at the progress report in your packet, it's the last report, and the cover says Kansas Blueprint for Literacy Progress Report. And I want to take you to page 4 of that report, and we can go into specifics about what we've done. And when we get to the centers, I'll take you to the other plan, because the centers is such a big idea that it requires its own plan. So is everybody there? Page 4? All right, some of that is what I have just articulated, but by August 24, we were required to have those 2 science of reading structured literacy courses in place for undergraduates, and that is in place. I want to mention, though, as we're here, that we're not just, those courses are improvements upon what we were doing, but we have been teaching structured literacy for the last several years in our universities, and the most recent results of licensure exams show that 90% of recent graduates have passed the licensure exam in structured literacy, and that's almost 9% higher than the national average. So I think we can be very pleased that the universities are moving to ensure our pre-service candidates have what they need. Second thing is designating structured literacy as our Tier 1 methodology. We don't usually use Tier 1 language in higher ed. It's common to K-12. But what this means is that structured literacy is what will be taught in our higher ed system, not the old methodologies, not whole language, not balanced literacy, none of the things that have been shown now to not be effective in teaching children to read. So each university, each public university, has now designated structured literacy as their primary methodology, and have assured that they have eliminated all those discredited practices from their curriculum. The third was the design of that foundations course for pre-service educators. I mentioned it's a graduate level, 6 credit hours. Tuition is paid by the Blueprint. We also are providing a stipend to educators who complete it. It's the same course offered across the 7 publics, and I anticipate many of the independents. And it will be piloted in March and go full scale, available in June. Now, the fourth thing on that list is the plan for the centers. So I'd like for you to flip back to the plan for the centers, if you will, and it's just in your packet behind my testimony. Or you can join me on page 4 of my and 5 of my testimony, and I'm going to walk you through what that's all about. So in Senate Bill 438, it required that the advisory committee develop a plan to establish 6 centers of excellence in literacy, and that plan had to be submitted to you all by January 1st, 2025. So we had about 6 months to get this plan in place. I'd be glad to answer a question.
Senator Rose.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And thank you very much. This is fascinating information. For current teachers, how long does it take for them to receive the certification to teach this? And what is the plan for making sure they have time in their schedule to complete that training?
It's a great question. We've been very thoughtful about that. So it's 6 credit hours. So you can think about it as somewhere between 170 and 180 clock hours of time. So it's a significant investment. The universities are committed to ensuring that they deploy that offering in ways that matches what an educator needs. So if educators prefer to have a series of Saturday classes that they come to complete the course, that's great. If they want to do it at their building, the university will go and provide that in their school building. So the actual delivery of that will really be dependent on the educators who enroll and what they say is their preferred methodology.
Senator Rose.
Thank you. For current teachers who go through that training, will they move up in the pay scale? Will they get a master's or?
If I were thinking about pay scale for K-12, I don't do that work anymore, I'd say they absolutely should, right? And many of the school districts we've talked to have that kind of progression, so that is possible that they can do that. In terms of graduate credit, yes, it's graduate credit, 6 hours of graduate credit, paid for, the tuition fully paid for by the blueprint, by the allocations that you're providing, so that there's no out-of-pocket expenses for them. And at the end of the course, the teacher gets a stipend. Now, they also will get a credential that says that they have completed a credential in structured literacy. We're working with the state board to recognize that credential in their seal of literacy work. That's part of that coherence that we're focused on. So they get graduate credit, and I think the other highlight of the foundations course is that they also get coaching. So it's one thing to go through a course that's knowledge driven. It's another thing to have somebody helping me as the teacher apply the skills of that course with the children who are in my classroom. So I'm hoping that many educators see this as not an on top of my work day, but something that helps me during my work day with that coaching component.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions while we're, Senator Gossett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. As an elementary classroom teacher, we know that the foundation for reading is kindergarten, first and second grade. We expect them to be reading by third. So what are we doing differently in kindergarten, first and second?
Well, in partnership with the state board, they have a whole plan for how they're addressing that and targeting, making sure that those teachers go through their letters training, or they have two other options there. This course that we're designing is specifically for preschool through grade 6, but primarily that age bracket, Senator Gossage, that you just recommended, preschool through grade 3. We need to start building courses then that are applicable to teaching a child to read in 4th, 5th, 6th grade and up and through high school, because we have kids in high school that can't read. So that's kind of a big next step for us. But these courses are very appropriate for the age group you've mentioned.
Thank you. One last follow-up to that is we know that during COVID, their children lost a lot. And some of those kids now are in junior high and high school. What can we do? What are we doing for those kids that in this program that lost a lot as far as their, they actually went backwards instead of forwards?
Right, right. It's children altogether who are not doing well. So that centers of excellence are our big strategy to help partner with school districts to provide coaching and support to the educators, support for families. And the word center sounds like it's a place that you need to go to, but I want to show you, I think I kept it in there. Here's the map of the area. But the centers are to be like a hub and spoke, if you will, that they will provide supports and training at the center, but they also must deploy resources to support teachers and families out in communities in schools. So we think that will be part of the strategy to addressing middle school and high school students, but we have a lot more to develop there in terms of what's the content, what does it look like, what's the course for teachers in those grades. That work is in front of us, not yet developed.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. Thanks, Cindy, for being here. I was looking at the trainings that's been completed, and I noticed, of course, that administrators are part of this. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. And so everybody can be on the same page on the center's plan. Let me get you the exact page. It's that chart that I showed you that you can't see on the screen. There's the document that's called Structured Literacy Micro-Credential Needs. Is that the one you're looking at, Senator Petty?
And,
right.
But I noticed that so far, it seems like there's going to be a lot of, or there are administrators that are now enrolled, but has it been difficult for administrators to find time? Because it looked like there was only 8 that have actually completed.
You know, I don't have direct info on the time crunch, but I can tell you that the commissioner is taking that course right now, and he does that on the weekends, so I would assume it's the same. I also appreciate that you recognize we have a lot of individuals in the letters training, and that's been a powerful offering that KSDE is doing. We have a lot enrolled, but we still have a large number not yet complete. And then there's a gap. Even if all of those educators currently enrolled in letters complete, we still have around 6,000 educators who are not enrolled in anything. And that's where we think our course can target those individuals so that we can make sure that we get 100% trained. But time is a challenge for all of our educators. That's why I applaud the school districts who are finding ways for educators to try to do this within their days as much as possible. But it is such a massive difference between how we were trained in the past. It is going to require a lot of resource and time from the educators. So we need to thank them for participating in this because they are taking away from family time in many cases to do the work.
Thank you.
Other questions, committee? I do just have a quick one. So when you mention about coaching in the classroom, that brings to mind that we do have already in many schools, and I don't know how many, that's what I'm going to ask, reading coaches, or they go by different names, but in my experience, they've been teachers that have come out of the classroom that have gotten some additional education or training, and their job is to do exactly what you're describing, is to help teachers go in and support them in the classroom. Do we know how many current reading specialists or coaches or whatever their titles are, and how they are going to be utilized in this plan?
I don't have the specifics on that. I'm certainly, that's something I can get you by talking to the commissioner on how many instructional coaches we have system-wide. I do know that KSDE has recently stood up training for instructional coaches, and so in the large districts, there's a designated amount of instructional coaches that get training in the small districts, but not every district has an instructional coach. So part of the role for the centers of excellence for the universities is to fill that gap, to produce more, frankly, reading specialists and coaches, and then to provide that coaching in classrooms. I was looking at that chart to see if we called out instructional coaches, and we did not. We called out reading specialists. And so statewide, we only have 425 reading specialists. That's another area that we must address.
So currently, my understanding is those reading specialists or instructional coaches, they come out of the classroom. So how many do you anticipate needing, and is that going to exacerbate our teacher shortage problem if we're pulling more of those teachers out of the classroom?
The decision on instructional coaches in K-12 is really not in the purview of this work. What we're trying to do is provide training to folks who want to aspire to that without necessarily impacting the educator workforce. So we're training, and then we have to work with K-12 to figure out how do we ensure we keep high-quality teachers in the classroom. Because you're right, we have 1,900 vacancies right now in our K-12, and 600 of those are in elementary. So we don't want to pull more folks away. But what our coaching will do, and the coaching that we're providing are university faculty that are doing the coaching, and they will be coaching and providing that course, and also coaching both in a virtual way and in classrooms in our schools, if that makes sense. So if there are other questions, I'd like to take you back to the plan for the centers, because that's really a significant piece that I'd like to get your feedback on and understanding.
Well, just a second. I think maybe Senator Starnes might have a
Okay.
follow-up.
Thank you.
Quick. Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Cindy, for your information and all your hard work. I really appreciate, too, the outreach of the families and the implementation of that. And I know it says research-based family education training and resources, which I think are very, very valuable. And it would be the same type of, quote, opportunities to learn more as you are providing the educators. I understand it's not going to be graduate credit and do those things, but at the same time, be able to provide them these resources to help them at home to continue to help with this progress.
So let me take you to the purpose of the centers, and I think I'll get to your question specifically. The purpose of the centers are threefold. Provide ongoing, deep quality professional learning for our educators. Support for leaders. Leaders need to understand structured literacy too, but they also need to understand how to support the resources. And then families. So families, it's all about ensuring that a family has access to high quality assessment and evaluation if they have a child that's a struggling reader in partnership with the school district. So in your circumstance, an expert from the center could be engaged by the school district to come and help design a literacy plan for that child and help ensure that it's implemented. And then for families in general, we want them to understand reading development and what their children should be learning and how to know if your child is on track and on time or not, and to provide them some support and resources, things like literacy nights and resources. So the centers are designed, there are 7 of them designed, and they will have to determine what their community needs are, including what their parents are in need of, how to engage families to make sure that they have supports in place. Now, not in isolation from the school district, but in partnership. We believe strongly we don't need to create a separate system for folks. We need to create a structure of supports and a network to help schools and school districts strengthen what they do. Great questions.
Okay, I know we've got about 15 minutes, so let's
Okay,
hit the centers. I know there's a lot.
So the purpose of the centers is ongoing professional learning of leaders, educators, and support for families. And so I've been asked, well, how long do we need the centers? We need the centers as long as we have one child that can't read. I mean, it's about working in tandem with K-12 and teachers and families to make sure every child learns to read. Beyond the 90% reading goal, as a family member, as an auntie, I don't want any child not to learn to read. So that's the goal. So the centers, the big plan, if you'll go to that packet, and the first plan past my testimony, you'll see a comprehensive plan for centers. I'm just going to have you focus on a few key areas that begin on page 5. And it says at the top of the page, plan for the centers of literacy. Keep in mind, the purpose is education for educators, support for leaders, and for families. That's really the shorthand in all of this. And to create that sustainable system. So part of the theory that I have, that many have, and the advisory council believes, is that we have been, as educators, way too dependent on what publishers tell us is the right methodology to use with children. When I was a superintendent, I bought into balanced literacy whole hard. Every classroom, every teacher, including content teachers in upper grades, we were doing what they said was right using balanced literacy. And I wondered why our results were not moving. Now we know, because that approach assumes that you had strong language background when you walked into the classroom, taught kids to guess. And you know what kids, if you tell kids it's okay to just guess a word or look at a picture or skip a word, kids, they take the easy road. So that methodology was proven not to be effective. So the center's a key role in that ongoing professional learning is to make sure that they are staying abreast of what the science tells us and ensure our educators have access to that training. So we don't have to backfill again like we are right now with trying to get the resources there. So creating a sustainable system to achieve the goals. There's required components of each center. There are things that are required that the advisory committee has outlined for you, and you can see all of those in the charts that are on the pages 8 through 11. This is what every center must do. And then the second piece is the shared expertise. In order to have a center, the university must commit their expertise and to share that across the network of centers. So that if a university has expertise in special education, all universities and all catchment areas, and I'll show you those in a minute, will have access to that resource. So what's required? Shared expertise. And then the advisory committee felt strongly that we needed to build in how to address the unique needs of each catchment area. So for example, in this catchment area, which would be Washburn's catchment area, they have tribal nations and schools. So they have to talk about in their plan and plan to provide support so that educators in those schools have the same support. So it's not cookie cutter. There are elements that are required. The universities have to share, and then they have to identify what's unique. So that was very important and is important to the advisory committee. Now, catchment areas, we're recommending 7 centers. The law called for 6, and I'd be glad to talk to you about why 7. And so analyzing geography, number of teachers, number of students in districts, we identified 7 catchment areas. So to be awarded a center, you have to commit to serving a catchment area. And so it makes sense that the catchment area that you are providing support to is closely located to where your university is. And so the university is designing a plan so they can be a hub and spoke. They'll provide a center that's available. In Fort Hays's case, they're going to have 3 centers, 2 satellites in partnership with the service centers, and they'll provide support that way. But they have to meet the needs. They have to know the unique needs, meet the needs in the catchment areas, and to address the training needs and the achievement needs of children. Next thing you'll see called out is resource allocation. So following that same line of thinking, the allocations that we're proposing in our budget are to support the required elements. The universities are bringing to the table what they're investing, a match, if you will, of what they're providing in terms of shared expertise. And then we will be seeking other resources because, to be frank, we appreciate the budget we have. I'd love to talk to you about how to make sure that that sustains, but we know that's not going to be enough moving forward to meet our needs. So we will look for outside grants and funding. And then the plan also outlines some impact measures. How are we going to measure that this is successful? So this plan has pretty high-level impact measures, but each university has to come to the table with their plan showing specifically how they're going to impact teacher skills and student achievement. And we are reviewing those plans now and should have them by the end of this month, ready to determine, are these centers ready to be implemented this spring across Kansas? So long-term sustainability strategy, and then continuing to build courses for educators, continuing to make sure that our undergraduate programs are high quality, that educators graduate with the knowledge and the experience that they need to walk into a classroom, and they won't be experts when they walk in, but they'll know what to do and how to meet the needs of most of their children. So that's how all of this is coming together, focused on those goals. 100% of our educators having structured literacy credentials by 2030, and that by the year 2033, that 90% of our children are reading at level 2 or higher, requiring that we make a 3% gain each year to get there. So, Madam Chair, I'd be glad to answer any other specific questions. You've got the copies of budgets in these plans, both for the centers and for how we're spending our resources right now for the blueprint. So ask questions and help me make this better. The advisory committee is looking forward to your feedback so we can deepen our planning at this stage.
Committee, we have about a maximum of 10 minutes, so we'll go around those who have a question. If you have another one, we'll come back. Senator Gossage.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Lane. So I've asked this before, maybe you have an update. If I'm going to set a goal, it's best to know where am I not right now. So where are we right now? We don't have 100% of the elementary students, right? And we don't have the 90%. That's the goal. What do we have right now?
About 30%, or a third of our children are reading below basic. So we need to move those children into level 2.
So at this time, we would say 70%?
70% of our children right now are reading at a level 2 or higher on the state assessment.
So we're wanting to go from 70 to 90.
70 to 90.
Thank you.
It's a great way to frame that. We want to get children out of below basic. Mm-hmm.
Senator Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have other states tried this method, and in what ways does this method incorporate phonics?
Let me answer that one first. Phonics is a core piece of structured literacy, and so is phonemic awareness and fluency and comprehension and all those things. The big difference is, well, twofold. Some of us weren't trained in phonics. I mean, that have been educated a long time ago. So for some educators, a deep phonics background, it will be new. But it's more putting all those pieces together in a way that's explicit. And unlike balanced literacy, where it was okay to guess, children have to master the concept before they move on. So let's make sure that we're explicit in the instruction, which phonics is part of, so is language, so is word development, all those things. And keep working with the child until they master each element so they can do it independently. Your first question, yes, other states. Most other states have taken the approach that this is a K-12 problem, so K-12, they have strategies for K-12 to fix their literacy crisis as well. We have a great strategy happening in our State Department under the leadership of the State Board, but we believe that we could go further, faster. Universities are engaging their expertise in solving. So we are unique in that the universities are stepping fully into the arena for this work. In other states, there are centers of excellence, generally one or two, generally research-focused, not application-focused. Our centers will focus on helping teachers have success in the classroom using structured literacy tools. So it's a little bit different. We're hoping others will follow.
Any other questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you. Are we looking at reduction in class size, especially for the younger grade levels? And also, are we bringing in any college students, parents, grandparents? Because sitting with a child one-on-one, you know, I've taught reading and elementary level, sitting with the child one-on-one, hearing how they're reading, giving them an opportunity to read orally, because you seldom have that in the classroom. I know we're looking heavily at curriculum, but are we doing any additional things like this?
The class-side ratio would be outside of the purview of the Board of Regents and the blueprint, but I understand why you're asking it. So that's a nice collaboration piece that we could provide some support for K-12 to think about. But we also have to be mindful that teacher shortage. So the research is clear that our K-1 classrooms should be 15 or less. I mean, it's told us that for years, right? So I think that's something we should figure out a joint strategy to address. In terms of what the universities can provide is making sure that the undergraduate students are actually in the field. One of my other theories, and the advisory committee is discussing, is how much clinical experience does a candidate for a teacher degree need? Student teaching is not necessarily right now a reliable experience for deepening a student teacher's practice. As you know. So how much clinical experience is needed? And so we will be looking at ways to increase that, specifically in literacy, so that the students are in the field, in classrooms as much as possible. We do have a couple of universities who are actually teaching their undergraduate courses in school buildings in their community. And that way they can just learn the content and walk immediately into a classroom and apply it and work with children. And so those are the kinds of things we're examining. How do we take that to scale?
Senator Petty.
Since this has been something that this committee has talked about and worked on, and now moving to as you're representing the higher education level being involved, that question earlier from Senator Rose about other states, would you say that we have made a decision, and I think you've really spoke to it, that if we really want to change the trajectory of how teachers are taught, or how teachers that are students are taught as they come through the programs in our Regents institutions, that we have to, it has to be based on science-driven, what we know about learning, and that in the past, because I mean, I was an educator, this is not what I learned when a time ago. So that we're trying to implement the fact that this is the best practice, and because it seemed like last year we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that our universities need to be all providing best practice. And now it looks like with the blueprint, that is exactly what they have all agreed to, that they are going to incorporate best practice, and that that best practice needs the support to then have the impact on our students' learning.
Yes.
Done.
I have to say that the universities have been, in the last several years, teaching structured literacy. They have. The difference here is that we're focused on how do we know that our students going through our programs can actually do it. So moving it from theoretical to application, increasing clinicals, having those application courses. And so there's evidence that they have been teaching structured literacy is in that recent passage rate on a very rigorous exam for licensure that we have. It's a small sample, about 200 have taken that recent test and are scoring at an average of 90, which is 9% higher than the national average. So our universities are moving, but we need to do more and do it faster. So the uniqueness of this approach is that we're not only investing in the undergraduate training, but saying to our teachers in the field, we bear responsibility, let me put it that way, for helping you learn the best methodology in classrooms for children. We want to help, and that we're going to be there side by side with you to have success. That is a very unique difference in what this state has decided to do.
And just as a follow-up, it seems to me that, and I'm sure this is true for anybody that's been involved in education, if someone's coming out of our higher education institutions and they're coming into a work environment where literacy is the literacy is not being practiced, they're going to conform to what's going on.
That's right.
There. And so if in fact we do support this is the best practice and that it's based on science and it's rigorous, then having the current workforce, which it seems to me, which is a good investment in investing in our current workforce, because then they become the role models, they also become the ambassadors, and they also become the best educators. And then now you have everyone on the same page and just not old versus new, and how do you blend them together?
I do have a real quick question before we have to get on the floor here. First of all, I want to say I think that literacy, I think we all agree, it is imperative that our children learn to read. And honestly, it's shocking to me where we're at, to Senator Gossage's point. It's unacceptable. We have to do something. But we can't afford to have another situation where we lose another generation of readers out of well-intentioned or however that happened. We've got to get this right. That's my point. We have to get this right. So to that end, my question is, so the goal is 90% on level 2 by 2033. And we're going to train the teachers. One, just a quick comment. I've been around long enough to know that teachers have the attitude, this too shall pass. They'll go through the training. And we want to make sure that they don't just go through the training to get the credential, but they actually implement it in the classroom so that we actually get the results that we need. So to that end, what is the accountability? What if we don't hit those benchmarks? We can't afford not to, Dr. Lane. Our kids, it's essential for our kids. But what happens to this plan? What are the pivot points? And that may be a longer discussion. Trust me, committee, this will be an ongoing conversation. This is just not a one-time and then we don't see Dr. Lane or other people around this topic. We will, but that's my question. What if it doesn't work? What if we don't hit those benchmarks?
Well, these benchmarks of requiring a 3%, we have to look at these on a regular basis. So The Board of Regents Office of Literacy will continue oversight with all 7 centers. We are forming a council of director of centers. They will be meeting monthly. They will provide quarterly reports on their data. They will be working with the school districts to get access to how are the children doing and bringing that data forward. So it's quarterly examining of data, looking at what we need to do and adjusting.
I appreciate that, looking at the data, but what's going to happen? I mean, because I'm going to push very hard because I care so much about those students and it's so critical. If this isn't working, then I'm going to challenge the legislature. Is this where we should be funding? We've got to fund what works. And so I want to very clearly, let you know that that's going to be the expectation. We want to see results, not just look at the data and adjust. We can't take any more time not to have our kids read. So, and I appreciate, we are so out of time, but this will be an ongoing discussion.
Thank you
Committee,
very
we are
much.
adjourned.
Thank you, committee.